Welcome to the last session of the Starting Your Farm series. My name is Bo. I'm the beginning farmer specialist here at MOFGA, and I'm also a farmer. Today, we're going to be going through planning for your first year in production. We're following the 11 steps of crop planning in a book I would highly recommend if you're going into your first year, or even your second or your third year and wanting support in crop planning. This is a book called Crop Planning for Organic Vegetable Growers. We're using diversified vegetables as an example throughout today's session, but it's a really applicable process, I believe, for livestock producers as well, where we're setting our targets and working backwards from there in order to create our farm plan. So we're going to go through the steps about how to plan for our first year in production. And the big takeaways that I would love you to walk away with is that not every choice you make is going to be the right one for you, but you will find the right pathway. And that's kind of like a moving target year to year. The joy of farming is that we are always learning and we're always figuring out what is the best pathway for us. And it might not be logical to all of the other farmers in the room here tonight or all the farmers you meet, but it will be logical for you. And finding out what works for you is a pathway of multiple years to get that. And so we're going to test things out and we're going to reflect. And by doing that, we're going to need to take good records. So something I'll like reiterate many times tonight is good and great records will help you make the decisions every single year. So as we move into this first year in production, setting yourself up for taking good records is something to prioritize this winter. Thinking about your learning style, thinking about how do you observe and take information down. Is that, on your phone? I take a lot of pictures and that is my main record keeping source. Or do you have a journal where you're writing down everything that happens to your zucchini that year? So your great records are going to work for you. They're going to work for anybody else that might be a part of your farm, like employees, like partners or friends that you're working with. They're going to include enough context and details so you actually remember what you were talking about, 4 months ago when you took that record. And they're just going to inform your future decisions to support your goals in the farming. So again, we all have different goals. We all have different approaches and learning styles, but taking the records are going to help you move forward. So we're going to go through these 11 steps and they might feel a little bit backwards because you're like, oh, I want to raise flowers or I want to raise cattle and I'm thinking about cows and I'm thinking about zinnias. But the first step really here in a commercial farming operation is to set the target financial goal. Because if without setting that target, we're not going to be able to keep farming, right? If we want this to be a financial operation that sustains itself, we need to plan our income first and then work backwards about, okay, what can we afford based on that? What are our expenses? This seems like a lofty goal for the first 3 years of farming, but I do encourage people to plan to pay yourself. As in, when you are thinking about how much you're charging for something you're selling, the cost of labor should be integrated into that. So come up with the sales target. Maybe it's $2,000 your first year, or maybe it's $30,000 or much higher than that. But come up with your gross sales target. So how much gross, meaning how much money do you want to make over that whole season? And what are the building block enterprises to make this up? So last session, we were talking about enterprise selection. And are you going to a farmer's market? Do you have a wholesale account? Do you have a CSA? What are those sales streams that are going to lead you to your sales target? Step two then is figuring out, okay, well, we want to sell into wholesale and CSA and a farmer's market. How am I going to distribute all that? And again, that's, based on the information we talked about last session, and creating the product list of what is getting distributed. So If you are selling into a CSA, how many weeks is that? And what is going to that CSA? So you can see that we went from this like big gross sales number of maybe $30,000 in crop sales. And we say, okay, we want a 12-week CSA and we're going to do a farmer's market for 20 weeks. From that, we're going to create this list that is like, what actually are we going to distribute through that 12-week CSA? And what are we going to bring to farmers markets? This helps us develop out sales projections for each enterprise that we're tackling on. And this will then lead to what we need to harvest to be able to sell that. So we're essentially working backwards from our financial amounts to what we need to harvest and then what we need to grow in order to achieve that. Overarching thing here is don't stress too much out about the details. Like keep this general, keep it general ballpark numbers and know that you are going to be so flexible your first year with what sells. So, maybe you're really excited about mixed lettuce greens and offering those every single week at the farmer's market, but you show up and there's already a really good greens seller there, and you realize that people are much more excited about your herbs and your flowers, and so you'll adjust in the season to market those more. So you're going to set these weekly targets. You're going to set these monthly targets about how much you're going to be harvesting to be able to meet your sales goal, but keep it flexible. I love spreadsheets. Spreadsheets really help me in my brain to see how this will flow every week. So that's where I would consider looking at Google Sheets or Excel and kind of making a grid for your growing season. As a crop farmer, that for me usually is like May through October. And I would say, okay, in May, what do I want to be harvesting on the farm? In June, and so forth. So from there, we're working backwards from our harvest target date to plan for when we're going to start something. If you are a livestock farmer, I think the most easy example here is pastured poultry. So if I want to go to the farmer's market in July with fresh chickens to sell for fresh meat, I'm going to work backwards probably 12 weeks from that to say, okay, I need my chicks to arrive 12 weeks before then because it takes about 10 to 12 weeks to raise a broiler chicken. So we're going to work backwards from when we want to sell and harvest that item to when we're going to start it. Again, if you've never grown this before, it's going to be like, well, how the hell do I know when to start it, Bo? So this is where there's a lot of unknowns, and that is okay. And this is where talking to other farmers and looking at resources like the Johnny's Growers Library is incredibly helpful. So you don't need to invent the wheel about how long it takes a sunflower to grow. You can actually go to the planning tools and calculators section of Johnny's website and say, okay, this is the crop I want to grow and this is when I want to harvest it. It will tell you when to start that seed. And then you can build your crop production calendar around that. If you've worked on another farm and you're starting a vegetable farm, ask that farmer, hey, when do you start your mesclun mix in the spring? When do you start your tomatoes? And hopefully, if you have a strong relationship with them, they'll be willing to share that information with you. This is a map, like an aerial map of our farm here in Monroe, part of it. And this is kind of when we got access to the land here. You can see that there's like a house down here close to the road, and it was just a giant field. Like that's what we had access to. And I kind of was able to observe that all of this area in the middle was wicked wet. It was tall grass. And so I needed to think about where our annual production was going, a place that we were going to till each year, and where our perennials were going. So perennials could go maybe in a little, wetter ground, and our annuals would go on the highest ground on the farm. So creating your maps about where you want to plant things, or if you're raising livestock, thinking about how are you going to graze those animals throughout your fields, and consider everything that you know right now about the land that you have access to. So if it's hard to remember at this point in the season, look back on pictures that you might have about, is it the real estate listing? Is it pictures you took when you were walking that land or in the past year or a few years if you've been on that land? Look at like what things are blooming when, what does the drainage look like? Do you have any soil test results from the past year? Does frost sit on this farm? Like, does it gather in the low areas? To help you kind of decide where to put different crops. Create strategies that work for you. Maybe this is like paper and pen. Maybe this is, in my case, our first year, I just took a screenshot from Google Earth and said, okay, here's where I want to map things out and we'll do my initial tillage. Maybe you really like spreadsheets. Whatever style, it just needs to be reproducible so you can recreate it each year and make sense to you and be relatively accurate. You'll notice that on this map, like I didn't put exact dimensions because I wasn't sure yet. And that's okay. Like it is definitely okay if you are not sure about all of these details your first year, because you might get a tractor out there and realize, oh, actually this area is way too wet for me to till, or the hill here makes it really not ideal for me to graze on. I can't safely move fencing around on it or mow it. Some of those things will happen throughout your first year, and you just need to take notes about that. So once we have our map and we have the dates that we want to harvest and seed things, that's when you go in to finalize your schedule. This is a snapshot about how I do my planting schedule and my varieties. It might look very overwhelming because this is also where I take notes. This is like my main note-taking document about what worked and what didn't work. So I have this at the beginning of the season and say, okay, on March 7th, I'm gonna plant my snapdragons and they'll be apple blossom and they'll be Potomac, and I'm gonna plant 128 cell trays of them. I'm gonna cover them with vermiculite, and that's where I'm gonna plant them, is in my heated tunnel and caterpillar tunnel. I'm gonna put 2 seeds per cell. That's the information that I had on there in January of this year. So actually, I think this was from a few years ago, but I have my varieties listed. I have a few different breeds. I have staples and enough of everything in here to sell consistently. And then the season happens, and you'll notice in bold here is where I wrote notes to myself, where I'm like, you need to trellis your snapdragons, they're going to fall over. Or don't grow Sweet William, it all rotted. Or if you're going to grow status, add in apricot and peach mix because that was missing. So those are some examples, is that like you can create a spreadsheet and then make notes to yourself. This might look really wild to your brain, but for me, it works. And that is really all that matters. Like I'm not going to print this out and share it with people. It's not like a fun document to read, but it gives me enough information the following fall to be able to make decisions about what we're going to do next year. This is other examples of what some of this planning can look like. If you are a CSA farmer, this like green and red color coded thing works for some people. They'll have the vegetable across the top and then the dates of every single CSA across the left-hand side. And this kind of charts out what weeks different vegetables will be available. And also in the spreadsheet on the right, it tallies up the value of that share. So it's a little bit more expanded, is that you can see that like in this case, they were using a spreadsheet, but they were color coding different boxes to explain when a crop is projected to be available versus not being available. So we moved from this like finalizing our schedule. We have a nice like production schedule for our farm into, okay, cool. We have a calendar that says what we're going to plant, what type it is going to be. And now we need to figure out how am I actually going to produce this? And how might my strategies for production influence my timeline to market? So, some good examples here is that if you have access to a heated propagation greenhouse that you're starting seedlings in, those seedlings are probably going to grow faster than if you were growing something inside under grow lights in maybe not optimal condition. And I will say it's very, very common your first few years to not have access to a propagation greenhouse. So just considering, okay, if I'm under grow lights, I want to build in some buffer for that timing and adjust my scheduling. Other examples is if you are doing like no-till production and you're trying to kill sod, that takes a long time. So if you have not done that field preparation this fall, I will say there's probably like a little bit more time where you're able to do an initial tillage and tarping. You're going to need to work in that field preparation in the spring and to kill sod and to really integrate it before you start planting production crops. That is going to take time. So consider what these steps are that you're taking and how much they're going to cost you. Always build in cushion time for resiliency. It might be a really wet spring that we're not able to work the soil until May or middle of May or late May. Or it could be really cold, and when it's really cold, we can't really spread nitrogen-based fertilizers because it's not going to be accessible to our plants. So thinking through our scheduling and just like building in that cushion time. Usually I like to plan my crops to be ready like 2 weeks before I actually need them. Because then if they are early, they're really cranking by the time I need them. And then we place our orders. Not until step 7. I think sometimes the seed catalogs get here and people just like go ahead and they buy all of the pretty shit. And I'm like, that is one way to do it. But oftentimes it doesn't reflect what you actually need to meet your goals. So please consider doing these other steps about how am I going to be producing? How much do I need to be producing? And going through all of that before you actually press buy on your seed order. This will also save you money. So something that I think Amanda, you shared back from that crop group was like, all of this costs money, right? It costs money to make money. How much do we actually buy? How much row covering do we need? How many chicks do we need to get our chickens to market? Building in, a percent loss of fatality there. How many seeds do we need? You're going to want to know how much you want to harvest before you buy the seeds. If you don't do the pre-work, what ends up happening is people end up buying a lot more things than they need, and it's oftentimes not what they like need or want in order to get to market. So they'll go into a seed catalog and buy a bunch of different things, cool varieties, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it doesn't actually reflect what they end up selling. So slowing down to do the work beforehand to understand like, okay, I actually only need 250 seeds of Crespidia for the whole season. That's like 2 packets, that is $6 versus buying one of everything. The one asterisk I'll say there is if you are in an experimental year where you're figuring out how you like to grow and what things you like to grow, you can slow down a little bit and try a little bit of everything and take the notes on that. So that is a consideration, is like if you're more at the homestead scale and you're still like figuring out what you want to sell into commercial production, maybe your strategy around this will be a little different. Double checking your infrastructure. This is just a note about like making sure that you have the right infrastructure to grow the things that you want. So if you came to me and said, Bo, I really want to grow lots of sun gold tomatoes. And I'm like, awesome. What is your covered growing structure like? Because sun gold tomatoes, if it rains, they crack really fast. So do you have the ability to cover them with some sort of plastic structure? So just like slowing down and thinking about, okay, here are the crops that I want to buy and the seeds that I want to buy. Do I have the infrastructure that matches them? Then we're going to make an operations calendar. So thinking about how will you prepare the ground? How will you manage your fertility? If you're raising livestock, what type of fencing are you going to be moving and how are you going to move that fencing? Some of this you're going to figure out in season, right? This is how I like to move the fencing. You don't need to figure out all of that right now. But having a general plan about what tools you're going to need and how you're going to prepare the ground can be really helpful now or this winter before you're in the week and having to make decisions. So this picture is of a BCS walk behind tractor with a tiller on it, and they're tilling sod at this point. Um, I don't usually recommend a BCS walk behind for an initial tillage. I would be like, go hire somebody from Facebook Marketplace with a big bad tractor and a big tiller to till soil or sod in order to break it up. But yeah, preparing the ground, how long is it going to take? Things like that. Lou says I would second that, Bo. Yes. um, so I'll share personally, like we've had this farm, I've been farming Dandy Ram for like 7 years. And we are buying a tractor this year because I have the capital to take out a tractor loan. So, that you don't need a tractor to start a farm. I think there's a lot of beliefs around like you need this, you need that, you need this, and it's like start where you are, do what you can, and start small and take a lot of notes. That's what I would say. We hire somebody, Scott Weaver. I found him. I think I like left a note on his tractor when I saw his tractor in the field next door and was like, "Hey, can you till our field? Call my number." A weird meet cute, but he tills our field each year, and it's $175 for all of the tillage we need. That's a lot cheaper than me my first year going out and getting a tractor loan. But now we're at a scale where we need to brush hog, we need to move compost and all that jazz. Um, but yeah, Lou says don't do the BCS initial tillage with a BCS tractor. It's hard. Okay, so we've like done all this like pre-work that Bo told you in this workshop to do, steps 1 through 8. We got it. We got our production planning, we got our maps, we got all that jazz. Then we're gonna actually farm. So then it's like go time in April and May. And this is where the records really come in handy. So please record what happens on your farm as it happens. It is much easier said than done. June comes along, you're like, cool, cool, I got this. July comes along and August comes along, and things just get lost in the weeds because we're working and we're tired. So the simplest ways that you can keep records are oftentimes the best ways. I use my notes document a lot on my phone, and then later I'll put it into my spreadsheet. I take a lot of pictures to remember how I set something up or remember a pest that I was dealing with on the farm. So that's just like go where it's easy for you to take records. If you have a wash pack, if you're washing vegetables, put up a piece of paper right next to your sink. That is where you're recording how much you harvested and washed that day. Some examples. If you have a chance, compare what's actually happening to the plan that you made in the winter. And this will help you adapt if you need to. Um, you have your planting records, hopefully, from when you made your seeding calendar. You might want to make a note about what actually happened in there. And then you have your harvest records. I really like records that allow you to have quantitative information. So the numbers of how many seeds you planted, the dates that you planted these, how many pounds of beans you harvested that day, whatever it is. But then also having qualitative information places. So Maybe it's a spreadsheet where you can record how many pounds of beans you harvested, but right next to it, it says, these look like shit. I harvested them too late. Please harvest them 1 week earlier. Self, like notes to yourself like that. So observe and record what really worked for your plants and animals, what didn't work, what worked for your time and labor. And then my third bullet point on here is probably my favorite one. What did you and your employees love and hate doing? So every year on our farm, we have a conversation about what was the worst day of your whole entire season. And people know it. Like they have that moment where they were like, oh, that time that I was pushing a wheelbarrow uphill through really tall grass. And those things help us make changes on the farm. Keeping detailed sales and expenses, of course, is really important. Sometimes your point of sale system like Square can do this for you. But whatever it is, just make sure it's organized by the enterprise, like the farmer's market or the CSA. Um, and then consider making space and time for everybody that's involved in your farm to offer feedback. So asking them their opinion about like, hey, what's going really well this month? What is not working? And having a space for people to take those notes. At the end of the year, so you've like done all the farming, and then hopefully you are resting and relaxing and cuddling your dog by the wood stove for a month. And then in like November, that is when you can really pause, rest, and reflect on what happened. So, looking at each enterprise to track what actually happened compared to what you projected and how you might do this differently next year. Please always review your prices. I know farmers that haven't raised their prices literally in 25 years, and it's painful because expenses go up every year. So reviewing your prices and tools like an enterprise budget can help you do that. But slowing down to look at what your plan was and what actually happened is really important. And it will become much closer to what you projected and what actually happened each year, most likely. So at this point, my crop plan doesn't change that whole much every single year. But my first few years, it was constantly changing as I figured out my markets and how I was selling and what people were buying. Is that like what actually happened was different than my crop plan? I had to change it every year. So as you go through this reiterative process every single year about setting your targets and creating your production plan, it will get much more honed in on what you end up doing. Because then we plan to do it again. We're reviewing all of these different aspects. We're reviewing our financials, our marketing plan, our schedule for the year, our maps, the varieties we selected, our calendar, and how you did. And we're always coming back to this first question that we talked about in the first session in the series was, what is your why? Like, why are you doing this? Why are you farming? And what needs to shift or grow or change in your plan for your farm for the next year to get you closer to that goal? Thank you all for joining the Starting Your Farm sessions. Again, if you did not see session 1 or 2, I encourage you to go up onto this webpage and look at those recordings as well as the pre-work worksheets associated with each one. As always, I'm available to meet one-on-one with folks over Zoom and talk through any questions you're having about your farm. I do this work any time of year, even though it says winter here. I would love to meet with you spring, summer, and fall to answer your questions. You can also email me any questions, and if I don't know the answer, I can connect you with somebody that does. If you are finishing up your first commercial year, so if it is wintertime when you're watching this and you just finished up your first year of sales from your farm, please consider applying to the MOFGA Journey Person program. Applications are due each year on January 31st, and that is a 2-year support program that includes mentorship, educational stipends, a business planning course, and a cohort experience to guide you along and support reducing those barriers that people face in the first few years of their business. If you're wanting to stay connected with MOFGA farmer programs, there's a link below to join the farmer programs newsletter as well as other resources. So I'm going to encourage you to also check out that newsletter where we share regular events from the MOFGA farmer programs team, as well as different grant and loan opportunities.